Hey guys, tonight we're setting foot somewhere colder than your mother-in-law's hugs. The Ice Age, but through the cracked, frost-bitten lens of medieval peasant life. You know, those brave souls who had the misfortune of being born into a time when central heating meant standing near a cow. Before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from, and whether your toes are currently colder than your soul. Because somewhere, it's always 2 a.m. and someone's feet are always freezing. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft white noise tundra ambiance, get comfortable, and tuck your feet in just in case history's fleas show up in your dreams. But let's pause and actually think about it. What was it really like to survive an endless winter as a medieval peasant? How did you keep warm when your walls were made of mud? Your bed was made of straw, and your only insulation was your own personal filth. Did families really huddle together with livestock just to avoid freezing solid? What did you eat when the ground was frozen and the pantry was emptier than your landlord's promises? How did people manage without indoor plumbing, hot water, or even the luxury of private misery? Would you last a single night? Or would you immediately try to invent the electric blanket out of desperation? Congratulations, you've just woken up sometime in the middle of a medieval mini ice age. The year is 1315. Your home is one strong wind away from becoming a pile of historical debris, your breath is visible indoors, and your best friend is now a goat. Good luck. It's dawn, sort of. The sun refuses to show up, your nose is already numb, and you're not sure if you're awake or just shivering with your eyes open. The rooster outside is frozen mid-crow, and you can see your own breath swirling above a pile of straw that technically counts as your bed. Welcome to the start of a medieval peasant's day. Your first conscious act is wondering if your toes are still attached. You lie there, swaddled in a threadbare wool blanket that weighs as much as an emotional support goat, but provides about as much warmth as a cold apology. You try to pull your knees closer to your chest, which is the only yoga you'll ever attempt, but the mattress, if you can call it that, fights back. Every movement releases a chorus of dry straw crunching, along with the faint but unmistakable squeak of a mouse, who has also decided this is the warmest place in the house. You consider negotiating for the spot, but honestly, the mouse seems tougher than you right now. Around you, a symphony of snoring rises and falls. Your entire family is bundled together like some kind of medieval human lasagna. Kids, parents, even grandma, who hasn't moved all night and might actually be part hibernating bear. There's no privacy. Someone's elbow is lodged between your shoulder blades. A cousin's cold feet are pressed against your leg. The only thing separating you from the frigid air is a lumpy patchwork of bodies, blankets, and whatever extra clothing people manage to keep on while sleeping. And speaking of clothing, you're still wearing yesterday's tunic, and the day before's tunic, and, let's be honest, last month's as well. Getting undressed to sleep isn't a thing here, unless you're hoping for a quick and chilly death by exposure. The rule is simple. If you own it, you sleep in it. Every extra layer is a small, itchy victory over hypothermia. You'd change if you could, but laundry is a fantasy reserved for spring, or for people with fewer survival priorities. The air in the house is dense and smoky, thanks to the little fire pit in the centre, which did its best through the night before finally giving up and sulking under a mound of ash. The warmth barely reached your side of the room, but the smoke did. Your lungs feel slightly cured, and your hair smells like you spent the night marinating in a very low-budget barbecue. If you're lucky, there's still a faint red ember under the ashes, which means someone will be able to coax a flame without starting the day with a wrestling match against damp firewood and the laws of nature. You contemplate getting up, but you know what's waiting for you. Cold. Not just any cold, but that special, predatory cold that seeps through every gap, every crack, every hole that last night's mud patching missed. The floor is hard-packed earth, frozen in places and decorated with last night's footprints, bits of straw, and something suspicious that may or may not be related to the family goat. You'd give a lot for a rug, or even a pair of socks, but instead you try to curl your toes and hope none of them have quietly resigned during the night. From outside, a rooster finally manages to finish his frozen crow, which echoes through the village with all the enthusiasm of someone who knows exactly what the weather is like. You can hear the distant thuds of other peasants staggering out of their homes, probably performing the same tow roll call you just did. The medieval alarm clock is less about gentle awakening and more about the urgent existential need to see if you're still alive. At some point you steel yourself and throw off the blanket. The air attacks immediately, sharp and biting, and you try to get your feet under you before numbness sets in. There's no point lingering in bed. If you're awake, you're working. That's the rule. Besides, the only thing colder than getting up is staying put and being trampled by the next person to try and escape the sleeping heap. As you shuffle toward the meagre warmth of the fire pit, you realise that nothing about this morning routine is accidental. Every part of it, every huddled body, every layered tunic, every smoky breath, is part of a centuries-old strategy for surviving the coldest mornings known to humanity. It's not comfortable, it's not glamorous, but it works, mostly, if you're lucky and stubborn and just a little bit numb. You stare at the grey light creeping through the gap in the wall and remind yourself, if you've woken up at all, you're already ahead of the game. Congratulations! It's another day in the Ice Age, and you're still in the running. Time to see if your breakfast is less frozen than you are. Let's talk about architecture. Your home is a sturdy combination of sticks, mud, wishful thinking, and more holes than walls. The floor is, well, the ground. Maybe someone tossed down some straw to keep the cold at bay, but mostly it's just a slightly less icy patch of earth, decorated with yesterday's firewood crumbs and a suspicious number of beetles. No one in your medieval village would call it a floor plan, unless the plan is simply try not to get hypothermia before breakfast. The walls rise up only as high as your tallest relative could pile the wattle, and in some places they lean inward like they're huddling for warmth. Every gust of wind finds a friendly passage into your home, bringing with it a fresh round of dust, stray leaves, and the sort of dampness that settles straight into your bones. This is the original open concept living. As for the actual floor, it's less a design choice and more a surrender to reality. You look down and see a sprawling, slightly trampled patchwork of dirt, occasionally enlivened by a thin scattering of straw, rushes, or, on rare occasions, something green that may or may not be alive. This is medieval carpeting, nature's finest, regularly reflattened by the stomping feet of your entire family, 2 goats, and at least 1 chicken with boundary issues. If you're lucky, the dirt is packed tight and dry. If not, congratulations, you own a puddle. After a night of rain, your floor transforms into a slippery indoor bog. On winter mornings, the earth turns to a frosty slab, sucking the warmth from your feet with all the hospitality of an ice bath. You can try to pile extra straw on top, but you'll soon discover that straw is to insulation what hope is to weatherproofing. Well-intentioned, but mostly decorative. Underfoot, the daily collection of mysterious objects grows. Bits of last night's bread, lost buttons, unidentifiable pebbles, and the odd ancient spoon. Every so often you might uncover something you dropped weeks ago, now preserved in a thin crust of mud. This archaeological layer cake forms the history of your household, from the time your brother spilled the bean soup to the day a sheep wandered in and left a gift. Straw and rushes are supposed to help, and you do your best to keep them fresh. This means every so often someone gets the glamorous job of hauling out the old composted rushes and replacing them with new ones. If you're not diligent, the floor will begin to grow its own life forms, which is great for biodiversity but less ideal for your peace of mind. Somewhere between the straw, the dirt, and whatever that smell is, you learn to accept that cleanliness is relative and that the floor is never truly yours alone. Of course, the floor isn't just for walking. At night, it's sleeping space for anyone who doesn't win the straw mattress lottery. During the day, it's a play area for children, a path for livestock, and, let's be honest, a communal dumping ground for every object you're too tired to put away properly. Every step is a lucky dip. Will you squish something soft? Will you stub your toe on a hidden log? Medieval suspense at its finest. And then there are the beetles, the constant companions of the dirt floor life. You'd think you'd get used to them, but every so often one scuttles up your ankle at 3 a.m. and you remember why people later invented flooring. Beetles, worms, spiders, they're all just part of the ecosystem. Sometimes the floor crunches, sometimes it squirms. If you're a cat owner, this part of history feels oddly familiar. Still, there's a strange comfort to it. Your house may rattle in the wind, and the floor may steal your body heat, but it's yours. The dirt is familiar underfoot. It connects you to your family, your village, and every muddy footprint that's come before you. Sometimes when the sun cracks through the thatch just right and warms a little patch of ground, you even start to think, maybe this place isn't so bad. Maybe, in a world where every day is a test of endurance, a patch of dirt that stays mostly dry is as good as it gets. And as you stand there in your home, barefoot, chilly, and watching the morning light filter through the smoke, you realise that, for all its flaws, the dirt floor is the foundation of your survival. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. It won't let you forget where you are, or how far you've come. Home, sweet hovel, just mind the beetles. You'd think the wind howling outside is the enemy, but the real villain is the ground itself. Cold seeps up through the floor like a petty ghost, freezing anything that dares touch it, including you. Drop your spoon on the floor, it's gone. Congratulations, you've invented medieval permafrost. You'd expect the world outside your mud and stick hut to be the source of your misery, but the ground beneath your feet has other plans. It's almost personal, the way the earth seems to resent your presence, sending up icy fingers to prod you awake in the middle of the night. You curl up on your straw, hoping to escape, but the cold always wins. It's not dramatic. It's slow and persistent, like a distant cousin who just won't take the hint. Let's talk about the physics of suffering. There's no insulation here, no wooden planks, no rugs, and certainly no heated flooring. The best you can hope for is a modest pile of rushes or straw between you and the frozen dirt. But even then, it's like sleeping on a frosty compost pile that occasionally wriggles. Each layer of straw starts out promising, but after a few nights under the collective weight of your family, it compresses to something barely thicker than your hope for an early spring. This is the medieval reality. Warmth rises, but in your house so does disappointment. The cold, meanwhile, is relentless. It creeps into your bones, making your joints ache and your muscles stiff before you've even stood up. Your feet never quite feel dry. You tell yourself you're just building character, but mostly you're just building chilblains. And it's not just you who feels the chill. Your possessions, few as they are, suffer too. Anything left on the floor overnight is doomed. Shoes become icy bricks, wooden bowls turn brittle, and socks, if you're lucky enough to have them, are more like medieval popsicles for your toes. Lose a turnip under the bed? By morning it's part of the local permafrost and may not reappear until the spring thaw, if it hasn't been eaten by a particularly motivated rat. Medieval peasants quickly learned that sleeping on the ground was more a negotiation than a comfort. The closer you are to the earth, the more it feels like the earth is plotting against you. Even your bed is just a slightly raised box stuffed with straw. No mattress, no feathers, and definitely no memory foam. Each night is a test. Can you keep enough layers between your skin and the icy ground to avoid waking up fused to the floor? There's a special technique to sleeping here. You tuck yourself in as tightly as possible, curl around your own shins, and try to occupy the smallest amount of surface area you can. If you're smart, you angle for a spot away from the wall, where the drafts meet the chill rising from the dirt for a little duet of misery. And if you're truly strategic, you let someone else sleep on the edge. After all, that's what cousins are for. Of course, there's an entire ecosystem thriving down there with you. The straw becomes home to beetles, fleas, and anything else trying to escape the winter. Occasionally you'll feel something small scuttling beneath you in the night, but you're honestly too cold to care. If it's warm and it doesn't bite, maybe it's just trying to survive too. Every so often someone tries a new innovation. Maybe you stack the straw extra thick or throw down old cloths and rags. Never mind that they've been cleaned in the river 3 months ago, and now just add a slightly sour aroma to your night. Some swear by layering bracken, or dry leaves, or even piling up animal skins when you can spare them from the goat. It never works for long. The cold always finds a way. And as you stare at your breath fogging in the half-dark, you come to understand the true winter isn't in the air, it's in the earth. The cold beneath you doesn't just chill your body, it seeps into your willpower, makes every morning harder, every task a little slower, every hope for a warm night a little more desperate. So next time you wake up with cold feet in your modern home, take a moment to thank your lucky stars. In medieval times, the cold didn't just come from the wind. It crept up from the ground, patient and undefeated, ready to steal your heat, your breakfast, and maybe, if you weren't careful, your last spoon. Your walls are designed for maximum airflow, which is a polite way of saying the wind does whatever it wants. Every crack lets in a draft, and every attempt to patch it with moss, mud or animal hair just adds another layer of medieval interior design, also known as desperation insulation. Whoever invented the medieval peasant's home probably never got cold, or maybe they just gave up. The basic blueprint is simple. Upright sticks for structure, wattle, that's woven sticks, not a chicken's chin, for infill, and a generous smearing of mud for the illusion of weatherproofing. If you're lucky, your house stays upright after a big storm. If you're less lucky, you simply accept the latest crack as your new window. Now in modern times, we love a home with good ventilation, but here that's not an option, it's a curse. Your walls seem to expand and contract with every breeze, offering the full experience of outdoor living from the comfort of your own freezing kitchen. As you huddle by the smoky hearth, a persistent draft sneaks up the back of your tunic, reminding you that the north wind owns part of your lease. No matter how many times you stuff a gap with moss or jam old rags into a suspicious opening, the wind simply finds another route. Sometimes you wake up to find the patch you just added has fallen out, replaced by a very smug-looking spider. If you're feeling ambitious, you might slap on more mud. Never mind that it's the middle of winter and the mud is roughly the consistency of ice cream fresh from the freezer. That's fine. Your hands are already numb. Every year the entire family takes part in maintenance. This means tramping around the house with buckets of mud, fresh animal dung, because nothing says homey like the scent of barnyard in your living room, and a collection of old chewed cloth. It's a bonding activity, in the sense that you're all miserable together. Patching one hole is just a dare for the wind to create a new one. And don't even get started on the roof. Thatched roofs are technically insulating, but only if you consider a few inches of dead grass an adequate shield against the elements. After a rainstorm, the thatch leaks in new and creative places, sending droplets down the inside of the wall, over your best cloak, and occasionally right onto your head as you sleep. If you're truly unlucky, you discover the roof now houses several families of birds, whose definition of home improvement is pecking fresh holes at sunrise. Let's not forget the charming medieval windows. Most peasant homes have windows in the sense of an opening in the wall. Glass? Never heard of it. At best, you might stretch an animal hide across the gap and call it a day. If you're lucky, you'll have a ragged scrap of wool or linen, which does nothing except add a mysterious aroma and block the view of your neighbour's equally miserable home. And just for fun, doors are really just loose planks hammered together and wedged into a hole. Sometimes they swell shut in the rain. More often, they swing open in the wind, letting in another friendly gust. The hinges are optimistic, the latch is whatever you can find, and the security system is good luck. Of course, there's an upside. You're never out of fresh air. The walls breathe so much you're basically living in a highly advanced, permanently drafty spa. No risk of suffocating, no risk of feeling too cozy either. On truly cold nights, the wind sings through the cracks with enough enthusiasm to rattle your bones. You wrap yourself in every available scrap of clothing, listening to the symphony of whistling drafts, creaking walls, and the occasional moo from the cow pressed against the outside. Still, this constant battle against the wind builds a sort of resilience. You get used to the feeling of icy fingers exploring your ankles. You learn to sleep through sudden cold gusts, the shriek of the thatch, and even the slap of a loose bit of animal hide fluttering in the night. You develop a sixth sense for leaks, a grim pride in the best mudded patch, and an unbreakable habit of muttering about the weather. So next time you complain about a drafty window or a chilly room, remember your medieval self. Here, the walls might breathe, but mostly they just gossip with the wind about how you still haven't fixed that hole by the hearth. In a house like this, comfort is optional, but persistence is not. And in a strange way, the wind becomes family too, always present, always testing you, and never ever letting you forget what season it is. If your house has a hero, it's the fire pit in the middle of the room. Forget fancy chimneys, just a heap of half-burned logs, a lot of smoke, and an ongoing battle between flames and frost. Let the fire go out, and you'll wake up in a scene from a historical documentary about popsicles. In the grand tradition of medieval interior design, the fire pit is the heart, soul, and occasionally the main hazard of your entire household. There's no central heating, unless you count the cow, but if you want to see another sunrise without turning blue, you treat that smouldering pile of wood and ash like it's the crown jewels. The nightly routine is simple. Pile on the last sticks, blow gently and pray. You go to sleep hoping the embers will still be glowing in the morning. Some nights, it feels like your entire family's survival hinges on the mood of one cranky log. Forget about a clean-burning fireplace or a nice stone hearth. This is a shallow pit dug into the centre of the single room you share with your entire extended family and half the livestock. There's a crude hood above it, meant to catch the smoke, but mostly it just offers moral support while your lungs get a full workout. The house quickly fills with a thick, comforting haze that would make any modern smoke alarm weep. Everyone coughs, everyone's eyes water, and everyone pretends this is perfectly normal. Which for you, it is. The smoke seeps into every bit of fabric you own, your clothes, the straw bedding, even your hair. On the bright side, you probably smell less like a goat, more like a campfire snack that's gone slightly off. The downside is you'll be clearing your throat all winter, and when you do finally step outside, you're followed by a cloud like some medieval cartoon character. Some say the smoke keeps bugs and evil spirits at bay. More likely, it's just too unpleasant for even the most determined louse. The fire pit is more than just a heat source. It's your oven, your stove, your lighting, and in a pinch, your entertainment. Every evening everyone gathers around it, the centre of warmth and, let's be honest, gossip. The stories start flowing the minute the sun goes down. Grandma retells that one about the wolf with the limp, again, and someone pokes the embers while pretending not to notice a cousin snoring, with his face dangerously close to the flames. Of course, you can't just let the fire do its thing. No, it needs attention. There's a rotating schedule of who has to wake up during the night to prod it, add fuel, and generally make sure you're not all about to become history's coldest family reunion. Sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's you, half awake, shuffling across the frozen floor, searching for a stick and trying not to set your sleeve on fire. It's a delicate balance. Too little wood and everyone freezes. Too much and you risk burning down the hovel, which, admittedly, might raise the property value. And then there's the firewood situation. Firewood is more precious than gold, mostly because you have to gather it yourself, often in the dark, usually when it's already started snowing. The best wood burns hot and slow, but by January you're down to scraps. Damp twigs, odd roots, and anything that looks vaguely flammable. Sometimes you stare at a broken stool and start thinking, maybe no one would miss it. The rationing of firewood is a family sport, each log debated, each splinter saved. All of this happens under the constant watchful gaze of your family. There's no privacy. If you want to warm your feet, you wedge them between a cousin and a sheep. If you want to keep your spot by the fire, you learn to nap with one eye open. If the baby starts crying, you all collectively groan and hope she doesn't wake the rooster. But there's also a strange comfort in the chaos. Everyone's in it together. If one person gets cold, everyone shuffles in closer. If the fire is dying, there's a chorus of complaints, and at least 2 people ready to sacrifice their dignity for another armload of damp sticks. So you huddle, you cough, you gossip, and you sleep in shifts, trusting that tomorrow the fire will be burning, the frost will have stayed outside, and your family will have survived one more night together. If you make it through to morning with all your eyebrows and only a mild smoke inhalation headache, you call that a win. In the medieval world, family and fire are your best defence against the dark, the cold, and the long, stubborn nights. Nobody trusted matches. They didn't exist, so you'd carefully bury the fire's embers under ash before bed, praying to wake up to even a single coal. If you fail, you get to spend the morning freezing, cursing, and desperately trying to coax a spark from flint while your fingers refuse to work. Banking the fire isn't just some rustic bedtime ritual. It's your nightly insurance policy against the creeping horror of a medieval winter morning. The whole family treats those last glowing embers with the same reverence modern people give to a smartphone with 2% battery left. Someone, usually the person with the least effective pleading face, draws the short straw and is tasked with spreading a thick, smothering blanket of ash over the coals. Not too thick, not too thin, too little, and the embers flare up and die. Too much, and they suffocate quietly in the night. It's an art form, but you're working with a brush made of hope and anxiety. In theory, ash keeps the heat trapped, preserving those little red nuggets of survival until morning. In practice, medieval life enjoys a good plot twist. Maybe the wind found a new crack in the wall, or maybe your younger sibling got up to use the chamber pot and kick the fire in a sleep-deprived haze. Or perhaps you just ran out of luck. An especially frosty night, and even your best effort can't beat physics. Either way, you find out at dawn when the ceremonial uncovering of the pit takes place. If you're lucky, you spot a few faint orange glimmers peeking out from the ash, which instantly boosts household morale. There's a scramble for kindling. Tiny twigs, dry leaves, last week's broken comb, anything that looks remotely flammable. You blow on the embers, cheeks puffed, hoping you don't just pass out from lightheadedness before something catches. Sometimes it works, and the fire springs back to life in a warm whoosh that feels like winning the lottery. High fives all around, or the medieval version, slightly less aggressive grunting. But if you uncover nothing but grey, stubborn coldness, the mood shifts from hopeful to desperate. Now begins the dreaded morning of making fire from scratch. The flint and steel come out, 2 objects so primitive and unreliable they could double as medieval birth control. You crouch on the icy dirt, your breath fogging in front of you, fingers numb and awkward as you strike the flint over and over, hoping to coax a single stubborn spark onto your carefully arranged nest of dry grass and lint. Your hands are shaking, either from cold, frustration, or the knowledge that everyone else is watching, silently blaming you for their rapidly freezing toes. This is no Instagram-ready, cozy by the fireplace moment. It's more like an Olympic sport for the hopelessly tired, and the stakes are high. If you fail, there's no coffee, no warm breakfast, just a chorus of groans and your family's collective judgment. The neighbours' smoke might already be curling up from their roof, which only makes your misery more acute. Is it a sign of superior firebanking skills, or do they just have better luck? Either way, you're considering eating your mittens for warmth. Fire was the backbone of survival, but it was also a point of pride. If you managed to keep it going all winter, people talked. You'd nod wisely and share your secrets. It's just ash and prayer, while neighbours dropped hints about trading for a glowing ember when they inevitably failed. Yes, ember trading was a thing, an ancient version of borrowing a cup of sugar, but with much higher stakes. If you were generous, you might lend a coal or 2 to the unlucky household next door, and for a brief shining moment, you were the hero of the block. And let's not forget the backup plans. If all else failed, Desperate measures followed. Some people walked to the edge of the village, begged a coal from the blacksmith, or even tried to steal a spark from the Lord's manor. In winter, there were no rules, only the sacred quest for warmth. By midday, if you've managed to resurrect the fire, the whole house is transformed. The smell of burning wood is a victory parade. People thaw out, moods improve, and the world seems a little less bleak. If not, you accept your fate, wrap yourself in every available rag, and vow to do a better job tonight. Because when the sun sets again, and you're banking those fragile embers under a layer of hope and ash, you remember, in the medieval world, fire isn't just warmth, it's the thread that holds life together, one shaky spark at a time. There's no such thing as personal space. When the temperature drops, your entire family becomes a heap of bodies layered for warmth. The only pillow is your cousin's elbow, and if you're lucky, you're wedged between two of the slightly less smelly relatives. If you're imagining a cosy sleepover with matching pyjamas and featherbeds, please adjust your expectations to include scratchy wool, questionable smells, and the sound of 3 generations of relatives snoring out of sync. In a medieval peasant home, sleeping arrangements are dictated by the laws of thermodynamics and desperation. Whoever came up with family togetherness never tried it with 6 people in a straw bed, 2 goats, and a dog who snores louder than the town blacksmith. It starts with a mattress, or, as it's known in the medieval world, a sack full of broken promises and straw. Over the course of a season, the straw compresses down to something only slightly softer than a pile of bricks, but with the added surprise of an occasional bug or mystery crumb. You pile every available blanket, cloak and tunic on top, but there are never enough. The truly wealthy might have a feather pillow or 2, but you have Uncle Bertram's knee. Some nights you're not sure if you're warmer from the extra bodies or just numb from being unable to move. There's a well-established hierarchy to bedtime. The oldest or youngest might get the warm spot closest to the fire. Everyone else negotiates their position in a silent battle of elbows, knees, and tactical toe placements. Once everyone has found a spot, nobody moves unless they absolutely have to. If you do shift in the night, you risk waking up your entire sleeping stack, earning a groggy chorus of grumbling and maybe a swift poke in the ribs. It's the medieval equivalent of playing the world's most uncomfortable game of Jenga. Forget about changing into pyjamas. You sleep in your clothes, every layer you own. Getting undressed at night is a rookie mistake that ends with you trying to put on frozen trousers in the dark at 3 a.m. If you're very lucky, you might get a clean linen shift on special occasions. But most nights, it's a patchwork of garments, each one with its own aroma. Personal hygiene is not prioritised. If anything, a few layers of grime act as extra insulation. Then there are the animal cohabitants. Chickens roosting overhead, a pig in the corner, maybe a sheep or 2 squeezed in for extra body heat. There's no such thing as the dog's bed. The dog sleeps where the dog wants, which is usually wherever your feet are. Their contribution to family warmth is considerable, as is their contribution to the general chaos. Occasionally, you'll wake up with a goat nibbling your hair, or a chicken looking at you like it owns the place. Because in a sense, it does. Sleep itself is more of a group project than an individual pursuit. Someone is always awake, tending the fire, getting up to relieve themselves, or simply shuffling around because their arm went numb. The soundscape is rich. Gentle breathing, snoring, coughing, the crackle of the dying fire, and from outside the occasional howl of something wild. If someone gets up, everyone shifts, and the entire pile of humanity resettles with the coordination of a medieval marching band in the dark. It's not all misery, though. In the darkness and cold, the closeness brings comfort. You tell stories, whisper secrets, or simply listen to the rhythm of your family breathing beside you. There's a strange reassurance in knowing you're not alone, that even if the wind is howling and the night is long, you're surrounded by the warmth and stubbornness of people just as determined to survive as you are. Of course, you're also sharing more than stories. Lice and fleas are inevitable house guests, gleefully leaping from one body to another. Every so often, the whole family has a scratching contest. If someone has a cold, by morning you all do. Germ theory isn't a thing yet, but you don't need a medieval university degree to realise that sleeping face to face with your sniffling cousin might be why you're always sick. Still, when the frost settles thick on the ground outside and your breath curls in clouds above the bed, you're grateful for every elbow in your ribs and every snoring sheep. Human lasagna might be crowded and noisy, but it's the only way to survive a medieval winter with most of your toes intact. And if you wake up pinned beneath a pile of relatives and animals, congratulations. You made it through another night, and that in itself is a small miracle. Space heaters haven't been invented, but cows have. On freezing nights you share your sleeping quarters with goats, pigs, chickens, and anything else with a pulse and some residual body heat. The more animals indoors, the warmer the house, and the more interesting the aroma. This isn't a rustic fantasy. It's a survival strategy older than firewood. You, your family, and every creature that fits through the door all pile into the same room after sundown, turning your hovel into a sort of medieval Noah's Ark, but with fewer rules and a lot more manure. Forget cute barnyard scenes. This is less Old MacDonald and more, why does my pillow keep mooing? You fall asleep to the sounds of snuffling, clucking, and the faint hope that the cow doesn't decide to roll over in the middle of the night. Bringing animals indoors serves a very real purpose. Sure, your new bedfellows come with an aroma best described as authentic, but the warmth they give off can mean the difference between a slightly uncomfortable night and waking up looking like a snowman with a cold. Each beast is a tiny, slightly disgruntled radiator, cranking out heat whether you want it or not. On the coldest nights, you might even be grateful for the body heat from the pig pressed against your feet, at least until it snores louder than your uncle. The logistics are simple. Animals on one side of the room, people on the other, in theory. In practice, boundaries blur. The goats are notorious for ignoring all concepts of personal space, wandering freely from sleeping family members to the half-empty sack of grain you're trying to guard. Chickens roost wherever they please, sometimes choosing the windowsill, sometimes choosing your mother's hair. If you ever wanted a wake-up call at 4 a.m, nothing beats a chicken jumping directly onto your face. Of course, there are downsides. If you're lucky, the sheep will only step on your hand once during the night. If you're less lucky, the cow will decide that the floor next to your bedding is the perfect spot for an early morning bathroom break. Medieval peasants develop a kind of sixth sense for animal noises, waking instantly if something sounds like it's about to go terribly wrong, but otherwise learning to sleep through a level of barnyard chaos that would send most modern people sprinting for a hotel. With everyone breathing the same air, things get fragrant. The warm fug of animals, people and fire smoke hangs heavy in the room. It's impossible to tell where the scent of singed hair ends and the gentle whiff of goat begins. No amount of rushes on the floor can truly banish the smell, but after a few winters, you hardly notice unless a visitor wrinkles their nose, which frankly is their problem. The livestock aren't here for their conversation skills. They're your best defence against hypothermia, and besides, nothing keeps burglars away like a large surly pig standing guard in the dark. There's a certain rhythm to life with animals in the house. You get used to stepping over chickens on your way to the fire, or sharing breakfast with a curious sheep who's convinced you're hiding extra oats in your sleeve. At night, you listen to the heavy breathing of the cow, the gentle cluck of hens, and the tiny rustling sounds of 100 unseen creatures finding their own cosy corner. It's chaotic, noisy, and more than a little ridiculous, but it works. Children especially love the arrangement. There's always something new to watch, poke, or try to ride when the adults aren't looking. Older family members claim the livestock keep evil spirits away. You suspect it's just because evil spirits don't want to step in anything unpleasant. Either way, having a barnyard for a bedroom is both a hardship and a blessing. One of those things that makes you wonder how humanity survived, and then realise, oh right, stubbornness and a willingness to let a goat sleep on your legs. So as you curl up for the night, squeezed between a snoring relative and a blissfully unaware piglet, you reflect on the bizarre but oddly comforting community around you. If your ancestors made it through centuries of winters this way, maybe there's hope for you too. Just don't forget to check your boots in the morning. You never know who might have borrowed them while you slept. Your winter wardrobe. Everything you own, all at once. A scratchy linen shirt, 2 wool tunics, a cloak, some dubious-looking rags, and if you're lucky, a sheepskin that smells like victory and mildew. Style is dead. Survival is the new chic. Dressing for winter in the medieval world is a little like building a lasagna, layer after layer of whatever you can find, each one slightly less appealing than the last. Forget about colour coordination or seasonal trends. The only trend that matters is, please don't let my ears freeze off. Your first layer is usually the least offensive, an ancient linen shirt that once was white, but now occupies the broad spectrum between beige and what happened here. It's thin, rough, and barely covers the essentials, but it's all you have. Next comes the wool tunic, itchy, slightly damp, and probably inherited from a cousin who outgrew it, or didn't make it through the last winter. There's a unique sort of pride in wool. It's thick, sturdy, and collects enough personal scent to serve as a medieval ID badge. If you're lucky, you have a second tunic to layer on top, which means you're now only 1 degree removed from feeling the breeze through your clothes. The fabric scratches, pinches, and resists all attempts at elegance. You're not so much wearing clothes as negotiating a truce with them. Belts and rope ties come next because nothing ever fits quite right. Medieval tailoring is a generous art. Clothes are made to fit most of the family, provided nobody breathes too deeply. A good rope belt not only holds everything together but doubles as a handy place to hang tools, pouches, and if you're ambitious, the day's lunch. No one cares if you look lumpy. The main goal is keeping the air out and the heat in. If you've got a cloak, it goes on top, draped over your shoulders and flapping behind you in the wind. It might be made from real wool or from whatever was left at the market by the end of the season. Its job is to add another barrier between your shivering body and the elements. If you're wealthy, by which I mean own more than one chicken, you might have fur trim or a hood. For everyone else, it's just a heavy, shapeless blanket you wear everywhere. And then there are the accessories. Socks, if you have them, are more like patchwork tubes of hope, cobbled together from leftover yarn and wishful thinking. Shoes are a luxury. Most are simple leather wraps that offer about as much protection as a slice of bread, and they let in water with all the enthusiasm of a broken dam. If you're desperate, you wrap your feet in rags or straw, which at least keeps the worst of the frostbite at bay, even if it doesn't win any awards for comfort. The pièce de résistance, sheepskin. If you're fortunate enough to own one, you wear it draped over everything, shoulders hunched and eyes watering from the smell. Sheepskin is nature's insulation, and you accept its musky embrace with gratitude, even if you do get a little nervous when the sheep looks at you with a hint of recognition. It's not fashionable, but it's warm, and that's what matters when your breath is visible indoors. Don't even think about washing your clothes midwinter. Laundry is an ordeal for another warmer month. Each garment is a living record of your daily struggles. The soot stains from the fire, the muddy splashes from the walk to the well, and the suspicious patch where you tried, unsuccessfully, to fix a tear with leftover string. Perfume is an afterthought. Here, everyone smells like sheep, smoke, and survival. Even with all these layers, you still feel the cold. Every gust of wind finds a way in, sneaking under collars and through gaps in your makeshift armour. You spend your days clutching your cloak, rubbing your hands and wondering how much colder it could possibly get. Spoiler, always colder than yesterday. Yet, despite the discomfort and constant itchiness, there's a sense of camaraderie in your shared fashion misery. Everyone looks equally ridiculous, equally bundled, equally focused on simply making it to spring. Style is irrelevant, endurance is everything. And when the thaw finally comes and you peel off that last layer, you marvel that you survived another winter, scratchy, lumpy, and absolutely victorious over the latest round of medieval fashion. Personal hygiene is out, personal insulation is in. Every layer of grime, sweat, and general filth clinging to your skin and clothes becomes a vital barrier against the cold. Think of it as medieval Gore-Tex, if Gore-Tex made you unpopular at parties. You didn't really choose this lifestyle, it chose you. At some point in late autumn, after a week of cold rain and muddy fields, you simply stop caring. Bathing is a summer sport, maybe twice a year if you're ambitious. Come winter, the closest you get to washing up is brushing the worst of the mud off your hands so you don't mistake your own fingers for turnips at breakfast. The dirt is everywhere, caked under your nails, worked into the creases of your tunic, forming a second, slightly crunchy skin beneath your layers of clothing. Here's the thing, it works. All that accumulated filth actually has a purpose. It fills the cracks in your skin, seals the tiny gaps in your woolen sleeves, and acts as a sort of organic plaster between you and the wind. Each night, as you crawl under your blankets, wearing everything you own of course, you can practically feel the insulation. There's a thin film of old sweat and honest-to-goodness earth hugging your shins, keeping the night air at bay. Is it comfortable? Does it smell like a bouquet of wildflowers? Absolutely not. But in the survival game, filth is a silent MVP. And you're not alone. Everyone in your family, from your grandmother down to the baby, is wearing a similar protective crust. The children, blissfully unaware of social conventions, see no reason to ever wipe their faces unless a parent appears with a damp rag. The adults have long given up. Even the family dog, who is probably cleaner than you, looks at you with an expression that says, "I'm not judging, but you might want to roll in something fresh." Medieval society develops a kind of group acceptance about all this. No one expects you to show up at church looking pristine in January. In fact, if you're too clean, people get suspicious. What are you hiding? Why are you wasting precious firewood heating water for a bath when everyone else is just trying to keep their toes attached? You quickly learn that dirt is not just a fact of life, it's a badge of honour. It proves you work hard, endure the seasons, and know how to make the best of a very muddy situation. There's a certain strategy to layering the filth too. First comes the dust and mud, then a nice coat of sweat from a day spent hauling wood or feeding livestock. Add a dash of last night's ashes from the fire, great for plugging up especially drafty spots around your ankles, and you're basically a walking, talking, human caulking gun. Even your clothes are in on the act. The older and stiffer your tunic gets, the better it blocks out the wind. Fashionistas might turn their noses up, but that's probably just because you smell like victory and compost. Of course, all this comes at a price. The constant layer of grime attracts things. Fleas, lice, the occasional beetle with bad taste. There's a reason the whole village spends more time scratching than sleeping. But the bugs too have their purpose. They provide a kind of natural exfoliation, and if you're honest, you're just grateful for the extra warmth. It's a communal experience after all. You, your family, and all the village parasites, one big, itchy team huddled together for survival. Bathing does eventually happen, usually when the ice in the wash bucket finally thaws, or the parish priest makes a pointed announcement about the state of everyone's armpits. When that day comes, it's a strange, vulnerable feeling. The wind feels colder, your sleeves somehow draftier. You realise just how much that protective coat was doing for you. The first night after a rare winter bath is always the coldest. You lie awake, shivering, and promise yourself you'll appreciate filth a little more next time. So if you ever find yourself transported back in time to a medieval winter, don't worry about soap. Forget about showers. Embrace the dirt, the sweat, the sticky residue of your daily life. Because out here, the filth isn't just part of the scenery. It's the thing keeping you alive. One grimy, unfashionable, perfectly insulated layer at a time. Your bed is a sack stuffed with straw or hay, lumpy, crunchy, and occasionally alive. Every toss and turn sends up a shower of dust and the distinct aroma of barnyard. The only memory foam here is the soft, mouldy spot where a mouse has been nesting. Let's be clear, in the medieval world, your bed is less a symbol of comfort and more a demonstration of creative suffering. The straw mattress, or pallias, if you want to impress your local monk, is the closest thing most peasants have to luxury. Forget about thread counts. This is all about quantity. The more straw you stuff in, the higher your chances of getting at least one night's sleep without waking up with a back shaped like a question mark. Filling the mattress is a seasonal family ritual. In late summer, someone, usually you, let's be honest, heads out to the fields to collect armfuls of fresh straw, which are then fluffed up and packed into large linen sacks. For a few days it's not so bad. The mattress is springy, and if you close your eyes and try very hard, you can pretend you're lying on a golden meadow instead of your freezing dirt-floored bedroom. By the third week, however, the straw is compacted into a dense, slightly sharp brick, and all dreams of comfort dissolve. Every night brings its own little surprises. Some bits of straw poke through the fabric, prickling your legs like nature's acupuncture. Other nights, you feel a strange warmth in one spot, which could be anything from last week's spilt soup to a small rodent currently enjoying your hospitality. You learn quickly to check for movement before settling in. If you hear squeaking, you might have to negotiate bedtime with a mouse. Medieval life is nothing if not communal. The aroma is a permanent feature. Fresh straw smells like the barn, earthy and sweet. But as weeks go by, and as your sweat, smoke, spilled beer and general living blend into the mix, the scent deepens into something best described as ancient cheese platter with notes of livestock. Every so often you haul the mattress outside to air it out. This just means letting it sit in the sun while the chickens inspect it for edible leftovers, and you pretend this counts as cleaning. And the dust. Oh, the dust. Every time you adjust your sleeping position, a cloud rises from the straw, catching the last rays of firelight and filling your nose with the delicate aroma of last harvest's leftovers. If you've ever wondered why medieval paintings rarely show people smiling in bed, it's probably because they're busy sneezing out a week's worth of mattress particles. You get used to the noises too. The straw crackles with every movement. The wind whistles through the walls. Somewhere beneath you, a beetle is staging its own midnight parade. It's not so much sleep as it is a nightly truce between you, the straw, and the mysterious wildlife sharing your bed. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you might find a soft patch, likely where the straw has started to rot. You roll over anyway, reasoning that mould is probably less pokey than thistles. Over time, your mattress evolves. The straw compresses, gets replaced, or sometimes just shifts to the edges, creating a sort of medieval hammock effect. Body in the dip, feet and head slightly elevated. If you're wealthy, you might have a feather bolster or wool blanket on top. But for the vast majority, it's just you and your itchy, semi-wild pillow. Some nights, when you're especially tired, you marvel at how quickly you fall asleep, even with straw poking you in places you didn't know had nerves. Other nights, you lie awake, listening to the symphony of squeaks, creaks and snores, grateful at least that you're not on the frozen dirt floor, though you know that if you roll too far, that's exactly where you'll end up. So you close your eyes, clutch your musty blanket a little tighter, and hope that tonight the mattress is mostly straw and only a little bit alive. Because in the medieval world, a good night's sleep isn't measured by softness, but by how many times you wake up scratching, sneezing, or wrestling for your half of the bed with a mouse. Welcome to the original all-natural bedding experience. Just watch out for the extra guests. Every winter is a new challenge. Patching holes in the wall with mud, plugging gaps with moss, and discovering new places for the wind to whistle through at 3 a.m. By February, your home looks like a quilt made by someone with no attention span and a lot of livestock. You might think of home repair as a summer project. In the medieval Ice Age, it's a desperate year-round campaign waged with the urgency of a squirrel hiding nuts before the first snow. Every time the wind changes direction, it finds a brand new route into your house, testing both your patience and your knowledge of medieval profanity. There's a certain artistry to plugging up gaps with whatever you can find. Mud is the most obvious choice, as it's plentiful and available year-round, but it tends to dry, crack and fall out just when you start feeling optimistic. You become an expert at improvisation. Got a hole by the window? Stuff it with old rags, a broken basket, or the remains of last year's failed attempt at knitting? Is there a mysterious draft behind the storage chest? That's what loose hay is for. Soon, the interior of your house starts to resemble an archaeological dig, with each layer of patchwork representing a different stage of winter panic. Some corners get extra creative. A chunk of firewood wedged in here, a sheepskin pressed there, and if you're feeling really bold, a leftover turnip acting as a temporary plug. Never mind that the turnip is slowly rotting, at least it blocks the breeze. Each family member develops a sixth sense for drafts. You'll be sitting quietly, minding your own business, when suddenly you feel a blast of Arctic air on your ankle. Everyone looks up, narrows their eyes, and begins the find the draft dance, shuffling around the room, hands outstretched, feeling for the spot where winter has breached your defences yet again. When you find it, a hush falls over the household as you gather the necessary patching materials, hoping this fix will last at least until tomorrow. Every wall tells a story, mostly of past failures. That patch by the door, that was the great sleet incident of last December, the lump above the hearth. That's where you lost a perfectly good mitten trying to plug a leak. The weird bulge in the corner, that's either a very old mouse nest or the remains of a particularly aggressive draft-busting session. Nobody's quite sure and nobody really wants to check. The roof is its own battlefront. Thatch is notorious for shifting and settling as the snow comes and goes. If you're lucky, the water drips in the corner. If you're unlucky, it drips directly onto your face at 4 a.m, forcing you to launch a midnight raid with more mud and a heartfelt prayer. Every new leak is an opportunity to show off your patchwork skills, or at least to invent new words your children will later repeat in church. By February, your home truly looks like a patchwork quilt, but not the cosy, Instagrammable kind. More like something assembled by a committee of crows and desperate peasants. The effect is chaotic but effective. Each patch is a mark of stubborn survival, proof that you and your family are not going down without a fight. The livestock seem to appreciate the effort too. Chickens huddle by the best sealed walls, cows lean up against the most insulated sections, and the family dog always finds the one spot you missed. Of course, even the best efforts have their limits. There's always one rogue draft you can't quite pin down, a mysterious, icy breeze that appears only at the darkest hour, chilling your toes and rattling your resolve. Some say it's the ghost of winter itself, sneaking in to remind you that comfort is a modern luxury. You learn to accept it, grumble about it, and tuck your feet further under your relatives for warmth. Still, the draft wars bring everyone together. There's nothing like communal suffering and collective repair projects to foster a sense of unity. Each patch is a family effort, a shared moment of triumph over the elements, even if it lasts only until the next big storm. And when spring finally arrives, and you peel away layers of makeshift insulation, you find yourself almost missing the challenge. Almost. In the end, you realise that these endless little battles aren't just about keeping out the cold, they're about holding your world together, one lumpy, muddy, moss-filled patch at a time. And that, in its own scrappy way, is as close as you get to true medieval comfort. Somebody always has to stay awake to tend the fire, chase away wolves and complain loudly about the cold. Sleeping in shifts means you're never really rested, but at least you have a fighting chance of making it to spring with all your fingers. There's a certain romance to the idea of the medieval night, candlelight flickering, family huddled together, gentle snores mingling with the crackle of the hearth. The reality is a little less poetic and a lot more like running a low-budget security team in a drafty barn. The basic rule is simple: never trust the night. The fire wants to go out, predators want to come in, and every squeaky floorboard wants to become your personal horror movie soundtrack. Who pulls the first watch? It depends on your family politics, age, and your ability to fake sleep convincingly. Sometimes it's the oldest sibling. Other times the parent who claims they can't sleep anyway. Sometimes it's just whoever is closest to the fire and already awake from a goat stepping on their arm. The lucky ones get the first shift, when the coals are still glowing and the cold hasn't sunk too deep into the bones. The unlucky ones get the hours just before dawn, when everything's at its coldest and the fire is little more than a memory. Fire duty isn't glamorous. You sit by the embers, poking and prodding, trying to coax the flames back to life with twigs, bark, or, if you're desperate, a handful of straw that you probably should have saved for your mattress. The smoke clings to your hair and soaks your clothes, but you're grateful for every scrap of warmth. You listen to the symphony of nighttime sounds, the sighs and shuffles of your sleeping family, the occasional grunt from a cow, the high-pitched squeal of a mouse caught doing something suspicious, and, if you're very unlucky, the distant howl of a wolf. Wolves are the stuff of nightmares and neighbourly gossip. Most nights they keep their distance, but every peasant has a story about the time the beast came right up to the wall. Your job isn't just to keep the fire alive, but to keep your ears open and your club handy just in case. You learn to tell the difference between the wind whistling through a hole in the wall and the subtle, toe-curling crunch of snow under animal paws. The rooster's crow in the morning is a relief, less because it means a new day, and more because it means you've survived another night without becoming wolf chow. Of course, no one actually gets enough sleep. Once your shift is over, you crawl back into the family bed, careful not to dislodge too many elbows or knees, and pretend to doze off. But even off duty, you're never really relaxed. Every cough, every snap from the fire, every suspicious noise sends a jolt through your half-dreaming brain. It's a routine of perpetual almost waking. Enough rest to keep moving, never enough to feel human. Even complaining is a group activity. If you're up with your sibling or a parent, you share whispered grumbles about the cold, the firewood situation, the neighbours' suspiciously well-fed chickens, and the universe in general. There's camaraderie in misery. You exchange survival tips, how to stack the logs so they don't fall, how to stay awake by pinching your own leg, how to tell if that thumping noise is a cat, a rat, or Aunt Matilda shifting in her sleep. If you're really lucky, there's even a secret snack hidden somewhere near the fire, a cold potato or a bit of bread, jealously guarded from the rest of the family. Occasionally someone falls asleep on watch. It happens. Maybe the fire dies, or a goat gets loose and tries to escape. The next morning everyone grumbles, but there's an unspoken understanding. Nobody wants the job, but everyone takes a turn. It's not about heroics. It's just what you do when the alternative is freezing or being surprised by something with more teeth than sense. In the end, the night shifts are a lesson in shared hardship. You're all exhausted, all cold and all slightly annoyed, but you're still here. When spring finally arrives and the fire can be left to burn itself out, you almost miss those long, anxious hours by the hearth. Almost. Until then, you take your shift, tend the fire, glare into the darkness, and remind yourself, in the medieval world, sleep is optional, but survival is mandatory. The air is so cold that open-mouth breathing is basically a death wish. Medieval survival guides recommend shallow nose breathing to gently warm the air before it hits your lungs, a tip you're too tired to appreciate while you cough up half your soul. It's a lesson every medieval peasant learns the hard way. Winter air isn't just brisk, it's actively hostile. The cold cuts through your tunics, seeps into your bones, and lingers in your lungs like a house guest that just won't leave. You wake up in the morning with a dry mouth, a crust of frost on your moustache, and the distinct feeling that your insides have been lightly refrigerated. Open your mouth too wide and it feels like you've just inhaled a spoonful of icy needles. Close your mouth and try to remember the ancient wisdom. Breathe through your nose or you'll be coughing until Easter. This isn't a gentle winter's breeze either. This is the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache, your ears ring, and your brain wonder if moving to the Mediterranean might be worth the risk of pirates. Nose breathing becomes a vital survival tactic, passed down from parents to children, with all the seriousness of a knight bestowing a family sword. In through the nose, your mother says. Out through the nose, or you'll freeze your tongue right off. You're not sure if that's scientifically accurate, but you're too cold to argue. Of course it's not easy to follow the advice. Between the smoke from the fire pit, the general funk of 6 people and 3 animals sharing a single room, and the endless, relentless draft, your nose is already working overtime. It's a delicate balance. Breathe deeply enough to get some oxygen, but not so deeply that your nostrils freeze together, or you inhale a cloud of mystery soot drifting across the room. During the day, you trudge through your chores with your scarf, or what passes for a scarf, tugged up over your mouth, trying to filter the air before it hits your lungs. The village's unofficial winter accessory is the sleeve mask, a tried and true method of pulling your scratchy woolen sleeve over your nose and mouth for a few moments of slightly warmer, slightly sheepier air. You get bonus points if you can do this while carrying a bucket of frozen water or chasing a wayward chicken. At night, the real challenge begins. Sleeping in a house where the air temperature rivals your ice cellar is its own sport. You pull the blanket over your head and create a small, humid cave where you can breathe without risking frostbite. Unfortunately, so does everyone else. Within an hour, the air inside your blanket microclimate is thick enough to chew. You emerge, gasping, only to get walloped by a blast of fresh, unadulterated Arctic air. Back under you go. It's a never-ending cycle. Like a medieval version of hot yoga, except nobody's sweating and you're all wearing 5 layers of wool. Of course, the risks of improper breathing aren't limited to comfort. There's a never-ending cough that circulates through the family each winter, a product of smoke, cold, and germs gleefully passed around in your tightly sealed hovel. The only person immune is the local pig, and even he sounds suspiciously congested by January. Every cough is met with a symphony of sympathy noises and half-hearted suggestions to breathe through your nose, dear. You try, but sometimes the cold just wins. Still, nose breathing is one of those little stubborn acts of resistance that define medieval winter survival. Every shallow breath through your nose is a tiny rebellion against the elements, a refusal to let winter get the best of you. Sometimes, on a good day, the air actually feels refreshing. Most days it just feels like survival, one careful, frosty inhale at a time. So next time you walk out on a crisp morning, breath steaming in the sunlight, think of your medieval ancestors. Each breath they took was a calculated risk, a balancing act between warmth, oxygen, and not coughing up a lung. And if you find yourself shivering, mouth clamped shut against the wind, just remember, you're not being dramatic. You're just breathing like a true survivor. You wake up hungry and immediately regret it. Breakfast is usually pottage, a lumpy, lukewarm stew of root vegetables and regret, ladled out from a pot that's been simmering for weeks. Sometimes there's bread, so hard you could use it as a weapon. In the medieval winter, food is less about flavour and more about basic survival. You're not waking up to the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh pastries. The only thing sizzling is the sound of your stomach, and the only thing fresh is the icicle forming on the edge of the pottage pot. The first thing you do is hope that someone remembered to keep the fire alive during the night. If not, breakfast will be colder and sadder than usual, as you attempt to thaw a frozen ladle and chisel breakfast from a solid block of yesterday's soup. The pottage itself is a catch-all dish. It's never quite the same 2 mornings in a row, because whatever goes into the pot depends entirely on what you found, bartered, or remembered to hide from the goats. Potatoes haven't even made it to Europe yet, so it's turnips, parsnips, beans, leeks, onions, maybe a wilted cabbage leaf, and, if luck is on your side, an actual sliver of bacon or a scrap of dried fish. Meat is a guest star, not a regular cast member. Each bowl is a slightly different shade of beige, and every mouthful carries the taste of culinary compromise. You grab your wooden bowl, which has seen better centuries, and scoop up a portion. The heat is uneven. 1 spoonful scalds your tongue, the next is icy cold, and somewhere in the middle lurks a mysterious lump that may or may not be edible. There's no time to question. The morning air in the house is cold enough to turn soup into slush if you hesitate. You blow on your breakfast and take a bite, feeling the warmth battle its way down your throat to the pit of your stomach. It's not much, but it's something, and on a winter morning, something is an absolute feast. And then there's the bread. Medieval bread is not for the faint of heart, or for anyone with dental concerns. It's been sitting out for days, the crust growing steadily more impenetrable. Sometimes it's so hard you wonder if you could use it to fix the hole in the wall. You try not to chip a tooth as you gnaw at it, dipping it in the pottage in hopes of softening it up. The flavour is earthy. That's the polite way of saying it tastes like someone baked it with a generous scoop of yesterday's dust. Occasionally you hit a chewy bit and hope it's just an unground grain, not a surprise from the last time the flour sack was left open. Luxury, if you can call it that, comes in the form of a rare honeycomb or a smear of butter, both saved for feast days or whenever someone needs cheering up after finding a beetle in their stew. Most of the time, breakfast is accompanied by a cup of weak ale or thin beer, because water is just too risky. Everyone drinks it, even the children, because nothing says good morning like a little buzz and a slightly sour aftertaste. As you eat, the family gathers around the dying fire. Conversation is minimal. Everyone is conserving energy for the day's chores. You listen to the wind battering the walls, the fire popping, and the sound of teeth valiantly working through the morning bread. Occasionally someone cracks a joke about the pottage, but most just eat in silence, faces red from the cold and the effort of chewing. Some mornings, the food is so bland you almost wish for something stronger. Even a little spice would be revolutionary, but pepper costs more than your annual income. Instead, you dream of spring greens, or maybe a rabbit caught in the snares. But for now you're grateful for anything that keeps you from gnawing on your own mittens. So you finish your bowl, tuck the bread away for later, or to use as a tool, and brace yourself for another day of work. Breakfast at Frosty's may not be much, but it's proof that you and your stomach are still in the game. And as with everything else in a medieval winter, survival always takes priority over taste. Want a drink? The stream is frozen, and even when it's not, it's probably full of mysterious floating things. Most people drink weak beer. Yes, even the kids, because it's less likely to kill you than water. Bathing is rare and only attempted under extreme duress or direct orders from the church. Water, the basic building block of life, takes on a new level of challenge in the medieval winter. Your relationship with it is complicated. When you're thirsty, you eye the water bucket in the corner with suspicion, knowing full well what went into it, and what's been floating in it since. The fresh water is collected from the nearest stream or well, but fresh is a generous term. If the stream isn't frozen solid, it's likely hosting an entire ecosystem of things that should not be ingested, from leaves and twigs to the occasional unidentified wiggler. You develop a keen sense for skimming off the least alarming surface layer, which brings us to the beer. Technically, it's small beer, a very low alcohol concoction brewed by every household in town. Even small children drink it because it's boiled during brewing, killing most of the things that would otherwise kill you. The taste is unremarkable. It's like someone described beer to a distant cousin, who then forgot half the recipe and just tossed in some old barley and hope. Still, it does the trick, and after a few cups you start to think maybe this isn't so bad, until you remember the aftertaste and wonder if there's any stale bread left to chase it down. Bathing, meanwhile, is a Herculean task reserved for the brave, the foolhardy, or those with especially persistent mothers. The idea of plunging yourself into a freezing bucket of water is enough to keep most peasants dirty for the duration of the season. Cleanliness is next to godliness, but in winter it feels suspiciously close to madness. Only the church, or perhaps a nagging spouse, can push a family into an all-out bath day, and even then it's met with a level of resistance usually reserved for tax collectors and wolves. Bath day is an event. The house is shut up tight. Every scrap of firewood is burned to heat a little water, and the biggest cauldron is hauled out for duty. Everyone takes a turn, starting with the eldest or the smallest, depending on who wins the argument. You wash quickly, grimacing as the icy air claws at your damp skin, and pray you finish before the water gets too murky or the fire burns out. The youngest, or unluckiest, get the last dip, a murky soup of soap, sweat, and all the woes of winter. You dream of hot springs, of warm rivers, of anything that would make bathing less of an ordeal. But until you're crowned Lord of the Manor, or invent indoor plumbing 3 centuries ahead of schedule, you just accept it. Most of the time, you're content with a rough splash of water on your face, maybe a brisk scrub with a handful of snow, assuming you're feeling truly adventurous and want to add instant numbness to your morning routine. Cooking too is a daily dance with water woes. Every meal means melting snow or chopping through the ice in the well, then hauling the heavy bucket back to the house while your fingers threaten to snap off. It's a team effort. One person fetches, another stirs, a third stands guard to make sure the goats don't knock over the precious supply. By the time you sit down to eat, you've earned every mouthful, and you're keenly aware of just how much labour goes into every drop. For all its hardships, the constant struggle with water does have a silver lining. It brings the family together, if only for grumbling, fosters a kind of resilience, and gives you a healthy respect for modern plumbing. You learn to make do, to drink with your eyes closed, and to bathe only when absolutely necessary, or at least when someone important is visiting. So you raise your mug of watery, slightly sour small beer, nod to your equally fragrant relatives, and toast to another day of surviving medieval winter. Water might be life, but out here, it's also an extreme sport, one best enjoyed with a good sense of humour and a very forgiving nose. Indoor plumbing is a fever dream. The bathroom is a bucket behind the house or a convenient bush. Everything freezes solid by morning, so you get to practice your aim while hoping your boots don't get stuck in something best left unidentified. To truly appreciate the modern marvel of indoor plumbing, all you need is one medieval winter. At first, you try to hold out. You wait until the last possible moment, clinging to the illusion that maybe, just maybe, you can make it until morning. But when nature calls in the middle of a frigid night, there's no negotiating. You resign yourself to the great outdoors, or for the especially fortunate, the family chamber pot, which is really just a glorified bucket with dreams of grandeur. The bucket sits in a chilly corner of the house, usually hidden behind a ragged curtain or a stack of firewood. Its presence is a blessing and a curse, close enough to avoid frostbite, but not close enough to avoid the smell. The bucket is communal, which means you're sharing it with everyone. Kids, parents, guests, the occasional overly curious chicken, and each user adds a little more character to its already complex aroma. Morning reveals the true horror of medieval sanitation. Everything freezes solid. That's right. What goes in doesn't come out until a heroic soul, armed with a stick and a strong stomach, hauls the bucket outside to the compost heap, which is really just a less travelled patch of garden. This process, known as emptying the night soil, is a family tradition nobody volunteers for and everyone dreads. On especially cold days, you get to discover just how creative ice can be, as you chip away at the contents and try not to contemplate the frozen stalagmites and stalactites now growing inside your own home. If you're feeling adventurous, or if the bucket is already full, you brave the outdoors. There's always a particular bush, a patch of brambles or the ancient privy at the edge of the yard, a rickety structure that leans slightly and groans every time the wind blows. Inside, it's even colder than outside, the wooden seats slick with frost and the walls rattling as if to encourage you to hurry up. You quickly learn to be efficient. No reading, no contemplation, just in and out and hope for the best. Boots, of course, are essential, but not always effective. The ground is icy, uneven, and dotted with suspicious patches that may or may not have originated from the family cow. You learn to navigate the yard like a medieval ninja, avoiding frozen puddles and half-buried surprises. If you misstep, you're stuck with a smell that lingers for days, no matter how much straw you rub on your boots. Hygiene is, at best, an aspiration. Toilet paper? Not even a dream. Most people use whatever is handy. A handful of straw, a scrap of old cloth, a smooth stone, or, in dire situations, just the hem of your already doomed tunic. Bathing is rare, so you live with a level of natural scent that would have sent your modern self running for the nearest shower. Privacy is another foreign concept. The walls of your hovel are thin, The curtains are more decorative than functional, and everyone in the house knows exactly when you make your midnight pilgrimage. If you're lucky, the chickens won't follow. If you're not, you get to spend the rest of the night explaining to a disgruntled rooster that, no, it is not time to crow yet. Still, there is a certain camaraderie in shared suffering. Everyone faces the same indignities and everyone learns to laugh, eventually, about the misadventures of medieval plumbing. By spring, the family tales include at least one story about someone getting stuck, falling over, or mistaking a pile of snow for a safe landing spot. So the next time you flush a toilet or grumble about cold bathroom tiles, take a moment to appreciate the sheer miracle of modern sanitation. Out here, the toilet tragedies are all too real, and survival sometimes means nothing more than a steady aim, sturdy boots, and the hope that spring comes soon. You have teeth. For now. Toothbrushes haven't been invented, so you occasionally chew on a stick and hope for the best. Toothaches are treated with prayers, hot onion poultices, or, in extreme cases, letting the local barber surgeon yank the offending molar with a pair of pliers and a prayer. Dental hygiene in the medieval winter is not so much a routine as a desperate series of half measures and crossed fingers. With no toothpaste, no dental floss, and certainly no minty fresh mouthwash, you make do with whatever's available, which most days is a small twig from a handy tree, chewed until it's frayed and vaguely brush-like. Sometimes you rub your teeth with a handful of ashes from the fire, believing it might scrub away yesterday's pottage. The taste lingers long after, like a secret reminder of why you should probably keep your mouth shut. Tooth pain is a constant threat, lurking behind every mouthful of stale bread or crunchy turnip. Medieval bread, in particular, is a test of both dental fortitude and spiritual resolve. One bite of the wrong crust and you risk chipping a tooth, or worse, discovering the true meaning of open-face sandwich. You quickly learn to nibble carefully, avoiding the hardest bits and shooting a silent prayer skyward every time you risk a particularly ambitious bite. When a tooth starts to ache, the whole household gets involved. Home remedies are legion, most passed down from someone's grandmother who claimed she could cure anything with enough onions and faith. The most popular solution is a hot onion poultice. You wrap a steaming, pungent slice of onion in a rag and press it against your jaw, hoping for relief. The only guarantee is that you'll end up smelling like soup for the rest of the day. Other favourite remedies include rinsing with salt water, chewing on cloves if you can get them, or even holding a warm stone to your cheek and muttering charms against tooth demons. But when the pain becomes too much and your jaw swells to the size of a goose egg, there's only one place left to turn: the barber surgeon. This local jack-of-all-trades cuts hair, sets bones, and when pressed, removes teeth. The process is as medieval as you might imagine. First comes a bracing cup of weak ale, or, if you're lucky, something stronger to dull the senses. You sit on a wobbly stool in the middle of the kitchen, while your family gathers around, partly for moral support and partly for the entertainment value. The barber surgeon, armed with a pair of tongs that last saw service with the blacksmith, examines your mouth, grunts thoughtfully, and mutters something about bad humours. There are no painkillers, just a strong grip and a quick prayer. With one swift yank, the offending tooth is pulled out, along with whatever's left of your dignity. There's no gentle aftercare, just a pat on the back, a bloody rag to bite down on, and a new hole in your smile. Congratulations, you've survived another round of medieval dentistry. Of course, after the trauma, there are the legends. Children are warned that if they don't take care of their teeth, somehow, with what nobody knows, the barber surgeon will come for them next. Adults swap stories of teeth lost to bad bread, cold nights, or one too many turnips. Everyone agrees that a day without toothache is a gift, and any excuse to avoid a trip to the local barber surgeon is a good one. In the meantime, you keep chewing on sticks, rinsing with cold water when you dare, and trying to ignore the occasional twinge from a molar that seems a little too interested in medieval drama. Dental pain is just another part of winter survival, right up there with frostbite and bad pottage. You soldier on, hoping that spring, and maybe a slightly softer loaf of bread, arrive soon. So next time you brush your teeth, take a moment to appreciate the simple luxury of toothpaste, soft bristles, and a world where dental emergencies rarely involve onions or tongs. Because in the ice age of medieval life, a toothache is more than just pain. It's a reminder that even your own mouth can betray you, one bite at a time. Your skin is a battlefield. Frostbite, cracked hands, and chilblains are winter accessories. Gloves, if you have them, are made from repurposed rags, and socks are a luxury. Most peasants just accept that a few toes will be sacrificed to the ice gods by March. Every winter morning is a roll call for your extremities. You wake up and check your fingers and toes, wiggling each one with the seriousness of someone counting their last coins. The cold does not discriminate. It creeps in during the night, biting at exposed skin, creeping under your blanket, and settling in the places that never quite get warm. Your hands are the first to suffer, rough and red from hauling firewood, scrubbing pots, and constantly brushing away drafts. The cracks along your knuckles are so deep you could plant seeds in them, but seeds would just freeze too. Hand care in the medieval winter is a game of creative desperation. You might smear a little goose fat or leftover bacon grease on the worst cracks, hoping the smell doesn't attract the family dog. Some families swear by rubbing their hands with ashes from the fire, which leaves you looking like you've lost a fight with a chimney sweep, but does a passable job of sealing in whatever moisture is left. For the most part, you just keep your hands buried in your armpits when not in use, which also serves as a makeshift social distancing technique. Gloves are rare and precious. If you're lucky, you have a pair passed down from someone who once worked for a wealthier household. If not, it's time to improvise. Wrap strips of old fabric around your fingers, or stuff your hands into the sleeves of your tunic and hope for the best. You learn to do chores one-handed, always keeping the other tucked away for safekeeping. Anything to stave off the numbness and burning pain that comes when the temperature drops, and to avoid the dreaded chilblains, swollen, itchy lumps that turn your fingers and toes into angry purple reminders that the human body is not meant for this kind of climate. And then there are your feet. Every day is a battle against cold, wet, and whatever has found its way into your boots. Socks, if you own any, are often more whole than wool, so most peasants rely on rags, straw, or just sheer force of will. By January, you have perfected the art of hopping from foot to foot indoors, and outside you adopt the gait of someone tiptoeing across a frozen pond. Each step is a negotiation. Will the ground be colder, wetter, or simply numb? Frostbite is an ever-present threat. The telltale whiteness, the deadened feeling, the slow realization that a toe isn't coming back to life anytime soon. Losing a digit to winter isn't shameful. It's practically a rite of passage. The village has stories about old Mags and her legendary 9.5 fingers, and the shepherd who spent 2 springs limping because he fell asleep in the barn with his boots off. Everyone secretly counts their own toes and wonders how many more winters they have in them. For children, the cold is both a torment and a source of pride. They compare chapped knuckles and see who can blow the biggest white clouds with their breath. Parents urge them to keep their mittens on, if mittens exist. But small hands find a way to slip out, only to reappear red and raw, and in need of another layer of whatever homemade ointment is currently in fashion. Despite it all, there's a kind of stubborn acceptance. You adapt. You build calluses thicker than the family ledger, and when the first hint of thaw comes in the air, you show off your battered hands and feet like war trophies. You made it. Most of your fingers and toes survived another round with the medieval winter. So the next time your skin feels dry or you grumble about cold fingers, think of your peasant counterpart. Out here, body maintenance is less about lotions and spa days and more about improvising, toughing it out, and occasionally bargaining with the ice gods. Because in the long, cold fight for survival, every knuckle, every toe, and every cracked heel counts. The ground is too hard to plough, but that doesn't stop anyone from trying. If you can't work the land, you repair tools, mend fences, and hope that spring comes before your stored turnips run out. Every day is just a creative exercise in don't freeze to death. Winter is supposed to be a time for rest, at least according to optimistic city folk and anyone who's never lived through a medieval January. Out here, rest just means your chores look different and are slightly more likely to result in frostbite. The earth is frozen solid, the fields have the resilience of iron, and the only thing you can successfully dig up is a case of chilblains. But no one in the village takes that as an excuse to do nothing. The feudal landlord expects his rent whether your soil is a block of ice or a mud pie, and you know that slacking off now only makes the spring scramble even worse. So you shift your attention indoors and to the odd jobs that stack up like firewood. Every tool gets a second and third round of repairs. Axes are sharpened, handles are patched, and every rusty nail is pried out, straightened and hammered back in somewhere else. You fix the fences that collapsed under the weight of last week's snowstorm, replacing rotten posts with slightly less rotten ones, and tying everything together with whatever string or vine you can scrounge. Fence mending is a communal affair, a chance to swap gossip, compare frostbite, and complain about the state of this year's hay. The livestock need attention too. You check on the cows, make sure the goats haven't gnawed through their own pen, and do a daily head count of chickens, which is trickier than it sounds when half of them are determined to roost in the warmest corners of the house. You shovel out manure, scatter fresh straw, and occasionally wrangle an escaped pig with the resigned patience of someone who has lost this battle before. Each day brings a new challenge. A door that freezes shut, a water trough that needs smashing with a hammer, a lamb born in the middle of a blizzard. If you're really lucky, you get to help with indoor tasks. Someone has to spin wool, patch clothes, and check the thatch for leaks. The older kids make rope, whittle wooden pegs, or help sort dried beans. The youngest are assigned to rat patrol, a noble cause that involves a lot of yelling and only slightly fewer actual rats. No one in the house is truly idle. Even the village elders, tucked in by the fire, are busy. They knit, mend, or retell the same stories about that one winter when the river froze so solid you could walk to the next town without getting your boots wet. And then there's the food situation. You monitor your supplies with the vigilance of a squirrel before hibernation. Root cellars are checked daily. Every shriveled turnip and slightly suspect onion is accounted for. You stretch flour, ration beans, and hope the cabbage lasts until the first snow drops. If you're running low, it's time to get creative. Foraging for anything vaguely edible in the frozen woods, boiling down bones for broth, and exchanging a favour with a neighbour in return for an extra scoop of dried peas. Through it all, you keep an eye on the sky and a hand on your aching back, hoping for a break in the weather or just one more day of manageable cold. The work never ends, and neither does the worry. But beneath all the grumbling and shivering, there's a sense of pride in keeping the household running. Each patched fence, each mended boot, each handful of preserved beans is proof that you and your family can survive, no matter what winter throws at you. So while the fields might be frozen and the soil asleep, your life is anything but still. The rhythm of work, the stubborn resistance to winter's worst, and the daily victories, no matter how small, keep you going. Because on a medieval farm, spring is always just out of reach, and surviving the winter is the hardest work of all. How do you keep food from spoiling? You don't. You just hope salted pork, pickled cabbage, and dried beans last long enough to avoid actual starvation. By February, the pantry is emptier than your optimism. Medieval food preservation is not so much a science as it is an act of stubborn hope and creative suffering. There's no refrigeration, unless you count the entire outside world, and even that only works when it's actually cold, not just damp and slightly above freezing. From the moment the last harvest is gathered, you're locked in a slow-motion race against mould, rot, rats, and your own bottomless hunger. Every week the family's stores shrink, and your creative culinary skills are put to the ultimate test. It all begins in the autumn, when the whole village comes together for a great frantic burst of preserving. Salt is your best friend and your worst enemy. It's expensive, but nothing else will keep pork from turning into a science experiment by Christmas. Every available cut of meat is packed into barrels, layered with salt until it's more crystal than flesh. Come winter, you chip off hunks as needed, soaking them in water for days to make them chewable. It's a taste you never forget, and never really get used to. Vegetables get pickled. Cabbages, carrots and onions are layered into stone jars with brine, left to quietly bubble away in the darkness of the pantry. The resulting pickles are sharp, pungent, and capable of clearing your sinuses in a single bite. If you're lucky, the pickling works. If you're not, you open a jar in January to discover you've accidentally invented a new form of life. The rule is simple. If it hisses at you, feed it to the pigs. Beans, peas and lentils are dried and stored in sacks, but even these are not immune to disaster. Mice have an uncanny ability to find their way into any food stash, and you quickly learn that a tiny hole in a bag means you're going to have some extra protein in your soup, whether you like it or not. Every so often, someone hauls all the sacks outside for an emergency inspection, shaking out the contents and picking out the worst offenders. Fruit is a summer memory by the time February rolls around. If you were lucky enough to gather apples or pears, you store them carefully in straw or hang them from the rafters, watching as each one slowly shrivels into a wrinkled ghost of its former self. Occasionally you find a survivor, and the joy is indescribable, a small wrinkly treasure that tastes like sunshine and hope. Most of the time, though, you're left with dried plums, sour and chewy, but at least they last. And then there's fermentation. Cider, weak ale, and the odd bottle of homemade vinegar fill the gaps between meals. Every family has their own special brew, and every family swears theirs is the least likely to kill you. Drinking water straight is for the brave or the foolish. By midwinter, even the baby gets a splash of small beer in the cup. By February, meal planning is more like advanced triage. You stretch every ingredient, boiling bones for broth until they dissolve, thinning out soups with water, and using stale bread to thicken stews. Every meal becomes a group effort to invent new ways to disguise the monotony. One night it's turnip stew. The next it's turnip surprise. You pray for a rabbit in the snares or a generous neighbour willing to trade. But mostly, you just eat and try not to think too hard about tomorrow's menu. Despite all this, there's a strange satisfaction in scraping through the winter on whatever you manage to preserve. Each empty jar, each patch of salt-cured meat, is a tiny victory over the relentless march of the seasons. Spring will come, the garden will grow, and once again you'll have something fresh to eat. If you can make it that far. So tonight, as you eye the bottom of the pickle jar and ration out the last handful of beans, take a moment to appreciate the inventiveness and sheer stubbornness that keeps you and your family alive. In the medieval world, survival is a recipe with 3 ingredients: ferment, salt, or starve. And if all else fails, there's always soup. When the cold becomes too much, you turn to prayer. The village church is barely warmer than your hovel, but the community comes together to ask for mercy, a good harvest, or at the very least, a winter without another surprise blizzard. It's amazing what a few weeks of relentless frost and wind can do for your spiritual life. When you've tried everything, banking the fire, stuffing moss in the walls, wearing every article of clothing you own at once, sometimes all that's left is hope and a handful of hymns. Your village church, perched at the centre of your shivering community, becomes both sanctuary and social club. Inside, the air is thick with incense breath and the collective longing for a change in the weather. The walk to church is half pilgrimage, half group exercise in not slipping on the ice. The roads are a patchwork of snowdrifts and muddy ruts, but the entire village turns out anyway, bundled in layers of wool and faith. There's something comforting about seeing your neighbours wrapped up like turnips in a root cellar, all united by the shared dream of just one afternoon without frostbite. The bell tolls, echoing across the frozen fields, and you hustle to the old stone building, more for the company than for the hope of any actual warmth. Inside you stamp your feet, rub your hands, and watch as clouds of breath rise to the rafters. The walls are thick and cold, the floors are rough stone, and the only real heat comes from the candles guttering on the altar. Still, There's a kind of warmth in the crowd, a mingling of familiar faces and familiar complaints. Someone sneezes, someone coughs, and you hope the cough isn't the kind that sticks around until April. The priest's voice carries over the congregation, solemn and slightly hoarse from endless winter sermons. The prayer's the same each year, a plea for gentle weather, a blessing for the livestock, and a request for enough food to last until the first green shoots. Sometimes, if the cold is particularly brutal, the prayers get creative. Lord, deliver us from chilblains and give us strong fences to keep out the wolves, and if it's not too much trouble, maybe a little extra sunlight by Sunday. For many, these gatherings are more than just a religious obligation. They're the social glue that keeps spirits up. After the service, you huddle in the churchyard, stamping your feet and sharing stories of draughty hovels, frozen turnips, and which family lost the most toes to last week's cold snap. It's a communal therapy session with a side of gossip. Someone always knows a new home remedy for frostbite, or has news about the merchant who claims to sell real pepper, though nobody believes it's anything but crushed berries and wishful thinking. When the cold feels endless, faith provides a different kind of insulation. You light candles for relatives, recite familiar prayers, and listen for any sign that the weather might turn. Even the smallest signs, a sudden break in the clouds, a flock of birds, a slightly warmer breeze, are greeted with hopeful murmurs. Some folks tie bits of ribbon to the church fence, hoping it brings luck, or at least distracts the wind for a day or two. Special feast days become highlights of the season. A saint's day, a wedding, or even a particularly enthusiastic funeral draws everyone together for a rare break in the routine. The food may be plain, but the singing is loud, and for a few precious hours the cold is almost forgotten. Even the priest gets in on the celebration, offering an extra blessing and perhaps a slightly longer sermon. Anything to keep people inside a little longer. Faith in a medieval winter isn't just about believing in a merciful God. It's about believing in each other, in the return of spring, and in your own ability to keep going. One prayer, one shared loaf, one freezing day at a time. The thaw will come, eventually. Until then, you huddle with your neighbours in the church, trading stories, sharing hope, and quietly asking the universe for a break. So as you step back out into the cold, heart a little lighter and spirit slightly warmed, you remember that in the medieval world, faith is less about miracles and more about endurance. The church might not be warmer than your hovel, but it's always warmer than giving up. And sometimes that's miracle enough. There's no Netflix, no books, and not much light after sunset. Entertainment is sitting by the fire, swapping stories, or inventing games like Guess Which Animal Farted. If you're lucky, someone has a battered lute or a passable singing voice. Evenings in a medieval peasant's home arrive early and stretch long. With the sun ducking behind the trees before supper, darkness and boredom become close companions. The fire's flickering glow is the centre of your world, and as the last chores are grudgingly finished, everyone squeezes in for warmth, faces glowing orange and eyes stinging from the ever-present smoke. This is prime time for the only drama series available, the collective imagination of your family and neighbours. Storytelling is the main event. The oldest relatives, those who remember winters colder than this one, or so they claim, command the best seats and the most attentive audience. They tell tales of wolves at the door, harvest gone wrong, and the legendary summer when 2 turnips grew together and were mistaken for a demon by half the village. The children listen wide-eyed, occasionally interrupted by a baby squawk or a goat's untimely contribution to the atmosphere. There are no spoilers here. Every story is new again with each retelling, details shifting and growing more dramatic as the nights grow longer. If you're lucky, someone will sing. Songs are rarely in tune, and lyrics change with each verse, but the rhythm is comforting and the melodies cling to the rafters like smoke. Sometimes a battered lute, pipe or drum makes an appearance. It might only have 2 working strings and a suspicious stain, but nobody cares. The music isn't about perfection. It's about distraction, community, and the stubborn refusal to let winter steal your spirit. When voices grow hoarse and the stories start to blur together, someone inevitably invents a new game. Guess which animal farted is a perennial favourite in households stuffed with livestock? There's also, how many mice in the pantry? Chicken or cousin? A game best played in a low light, and Spot the Draft. A serious contest where the winner gets the warmest spot by the fire for the rest of the night. Competitive streaks run deep. In a world with so few distractions, even staring at the dancing shadows on the wall can turn into a championship event. Sometimes a visitor from another house brings news from the outside. Who got married, who broke their ankle, which noble has imposed a new tax, or whether the tanner's dog really did eat an entire wheel of cheese. Gossip is an essential survival tool, spreading warmth and laughter through the dark. By the time the visitor leaves, everyone has contributed a rumour or two, some true, some invented for the sheer pleasure of storytelling. There's practical entertainment too. On especially long nights, someone might mend a tunic by firelight, whittle a toy for the baby, or practice spinning wool. Children play with scraps of wood, inventing little dramas of their own. If there's a particularly clever sheepdog or a bold mouse, even the animals can become the stars of impromptu performances, cheered on by a crowd grateful for any excuse to laugh. But not all entertainment is about fun. Sometimes it's just creative suffering in disguise. Who can keep their hand closest to the flames the longest? Who dares to step barefoot to the door and back? Who has the worst tale of toe loss, or the most dramatic near miss with a falling icicle? Even complaints become a kind of entertainment, a competition to see who can paint the most vivid picture of winter misery. Yet as night drags on, the atmosphere turns gentle. The fire dies down, the youngest children doze off, and the oldest ones drift into stories so familiar that the line between fact and fantasy blurs. The wind rattles the shutters, the embers glow, and for a while, the cold is forgotten in the warmth of laughter, shared tales, and the unbreakable bond of a family surviving together. So while you might envy the easy distractions of modern life, remember that medieval winter made entertainment out of nothing at all. A story, a song, a joke at the expense of a particularly smelly goat. And maybe, as you finally head to bed, you realise that creative suffering was just another way to keep hope and laughter burning through the darkest nights. Winter is the season of communal suffering. Everyone is equally cold, hungry, and tired of each other's stories. But surviving together means forging the kind of family bonds that only come from mutual frostbite and shared lice. If you think medieval peasants spent the long cold months isolated in their hovels, quietly enduring hardship alone, think again. Winter is, paradoxically, the time when everyone gets closest, literally and figuratively. The house is so crowded with relatives, livestock, and stray neighbours that you could measure social distance in centimetres, if anyone had invented centimetres yet. Privacy is a rumour. Personal space is a luxury reserved for the family pig, who can always find a quiet corner when she wants one. During the long, dark evenings, people gather around the central fire not only for warmth, but for the comfort of familiar faces. The conversation ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's practical. Plans for the next day's chores, updates on the state of the food stores, or which wall is letting in the most wind this week. But often it's simply banter, teasing, complaining, or swapping the same well-worn stories until even the baby could recite them backwards. You gripe about the weather, your neighbours snoring, or the fact that someone always gets the warmest spot by the hearth. Someone makes a joke about turnip stew for the 100th time, and somehow it's still funny, sort of. Children add chaos to the mix, darting between adults, inventing games, and learning the family's favourite jokes and grudges. The older ones help with chores or try to look important by holding the lantern, while the youngest chase chickens or build forts out of firewood. If you're lucky, the evening includes a visit from a neighbour or a wandering peddler, bringing with them gossip from 3 villages over. The news might be bad, but at least it's new. There's something strangely unifying about being miserable together. Misery doesn't care if you're the oldest sibling or the new farmhand. Everyone has the same chapped hands, sore feet, and grumbling stomach. If someone has lice, everyone soon does, and a group scratching session around the fire is just another winter pastime. When sickness goes around, everyone takes turns caring for the afflicted, and then inevitably catching the same cold. In this world, shared hardship is both a curse and a glue. Celebrations, however modest, break the monotony. A name day, a wedding, or even a birthday is an excuse for everyone to come together. The food is still plain, the house is still drafty, but for an evening there's music, laughter, and maybe even a communal dance if someone is brave enough to play a tune. You forget for a little while about your freezing toes and focus on clapping along, off-key singing, and the rare treat of something sweet. Even the surliest uncle can be seen grinning, his usual complaints drowned out by the general noise. Of course, living in such close quarters isn't always harmonious. Tempers flare, especially when sleep is in short supply or food runs low. Small arguments over chores or seating arrangements can erupt into epic dramas, only to be forgotten the next morning when everyone's too tired to remember why they were annoyed. There's an unspoken rule: by dawn, all is forgiven, or at least ignored, because surviving winter is a group project, and grudges are too heavy to carry when you're already hauling firewood and livestock feed. Over time, these endless days and nights of forced togetherness create bonds that last long after the thaw. You know everyone's habits, secrets, and dreams. You've witnessed each other's best and worst moments, from tearful reunions to spectacular wipeouts on the ice patch by the door. You may not always get along, but you know, with unshakable certainty, that you're all in it together. So if modern winter ever feels lonely, spare a thought for your medieval counterpart. Out here, social life means learning to laugh at your misfortunes, love your family in all their noisy glory, and count yourself lucky if you only catch lice once this season. Because sometimes misery really does love company, and sometimes that's the only thing that gets you through to spring. Eventually the days get longer, the snow melts, and you remember what the sun looks like. Surviving the Ice Age winter isn't about thriving. It's about stumbling into spring with most of your limbs and a new appreciation for mud that isn't frozen solid. Spring arrives not as a grand announcement, but as a slow, stubborn rumour. The icicles clinging to the eaves drip a little faster. The snow recedes to reveal last autumn's forgotten chores, and a tentative green pushes its way through the sludge. There's a moment of disbelief. Could it really be over? Can you finally step outside without bracing for instant frostbite? For days, no one quite trusts it. The elders warn, don't put away your cloak yet, because the last surprise snowstorm always lurks just out of sight. But it comes eventually. The sunlight sticks around longer each evening, and the biting wind softens to something almost friendly. You fling open the hovel door and inhale deeply, only to cough immediately when you realise that fresh air also carries the smell of everything that spent 5 months fermenting under the ice. Still, there's hope in every breath. The mud underfoot is no longer a death trap, but a stickier, squelchy promise that life is returning. Spring fever hits the household hard. Children burst outdoors to chase chickens and get gloriously filthy, while the adults shed layers of wool and shake out tunics that have doubled as pyjamas, work clothes and blankets since November. There's a communal effort to air out the bedding, sweep the straw, and finally banish the family goat back outside, much to everyone's, especially the goat's, relief. Your body is battered but grateful. You wiggle your fingers and toes, counting up your survivors, and make a mental note to celebrate any that made it through without turning black. Chapped hands and cracked heels slowly heal in the warmer, gentler air. Every meal becomes a little less desperate. You raid the root cellar and finally toss the last wrinkled turnip, vowing to plant twice as many this year and pray you never have to eat another pickled onion until next winter. The fields call. The soil, once a solid sheet of iron, is now muddy and forgiving, ready for the first tentative seeds. You dig, you plant, you curse the crows, and you marvel at every green shoot poking through. The sheer act of planting feels rebellious, like a dare against the universe. Go ahead, bring another blizzard, see if we care. Everyone gets involved, from the oldest grandparent to the youngest child, because everyone knows what's at stake. If the harvest fails, so does the next winter. Social life rebounds with the season. Neighbours visit to swap stories, trade whatever hasn't spoiled, and share in the communal relief that the sun still exists. Someone organises a modest feast, stale bread and the first wild greens, but it might as well be a royal banquet. There's laughter in the village square, songs you haven't heard since last autumn, and a renewed belief that the worst is behind you. Even the church changes its tune. The prayers shift from desperate pleas for survival to hopeful blessings for the new crops. The priest, who spent winter extolling the virtues of patience and endurance, suddenly remembers all the cheerful hymns. The bells ring louder, the candles burn brighter, and every ritual takes on the air of celebration rather than supplication. With each passing day you reclaim a little more of yourself. The winter's scars, both physical and mental, begin to fade. You trade stories about the coldest night, the worst draught, the narrow escapes from frostbitten disaster. They become family legends, retold for years, proof that you endured together. And so, as you watch the world thaw and green up, you let yourself hope, just a little. You survived another Ice Age winter against all odds. You're tired, hungry for something fresh and maybe missing a toe, but you made it. Spring isn't a reward, it's a second chance. And you, like every stubborn, sniffling, frostbitten peasant before you, are already planning how to do it all again. Hopefully with fewer pickled onions next time. Just when you thought the cold was your worst enemy, you remember you're never alone, because lice, fleas and other tiny freeloaders have declared your scalp their winter holiday home. You scratch absent-mindedly, realising that every member of your family is hosting a thriving miniature ecosystem. In the medieval Ice Age, there's no such thing as personal space, especially when it comes to parasites. Your only defence is communal suffering, and maybe the occasional singed louse when you get too close to the fire. It starts as an itch. You tell yourself it's just the straw in your mattress, the scratchy wool of your tunic, or the natural effect of not having seen soap since the last Saint's Day. But after a few weeks of cold weather and even colder water, you have to face the truth. You, your siblings, your parents, and probably the family dog are all crawling with tiny guests who have nowhere better to be. The warmth of shared bodies and the lack of winter hygiene combine to make you an irresistible resort for anything with 6 legs and no sense of shame. Forget privacy, lice love crowds. Every time you huddle by the fire or nestle together for sleep, the little invaders take the opportunity to explore new real estate. Family time means sharing everything. Food, stories, warmth, and, inevitably, a fresh batch of lice. There's no point pretending you're above it. Even the Lord's children aren't immune, though they might have someone to comb their hair and check for squatters, while you just hope nobody notices you scratching at church. Daily life becomes a careful choreography of absent-minded scratching. You can tell how long winter's lasted by how often people pause mid-conversation to rake their fingers through their hair or thump their tunics in hopes of dislodging something with a vendetta. Fleas are the sprinters, launching themselves onto your ankles at the first opportunity. Lice are the long-haul tenants, burrowing in for weeks at a time, multiplying with a work ethic that would impress any peasant. The battle against these unwelcome guests is equal parts resigned acceptance and desperate innovation. Most families keep a knit comb, which is just a finely toothed wooden comb handed down from someone who gave up on dignity generations ago. On rare sunny winter days, you'll find half the village outside combing through each other's hair and squinting for eggs in the daylight. This is medieval bonding at its finest. Nothing says trust quite like letting your cousin go hunting for lice behind your ears. Some people turn to fire for assistance. Leaning in a bit too close to the hearth, they hope the heat will singe off a few freeloaders. The familiar sizzle, the smell of burning hair, and the sudden panicked dance as someone jumps away from a little too much enthusiasm. These are winter traditions passed down with pride and a grim sense of humour. For those with extra creativity or desperation, there are home remedies. Dusting your head with ashes, rubbing in vinegar, or even applying a paste of crushed herbs and wishful thinking. The results are mixed, and the main effect is usually just smelling like salad dressing for the rest of the week. Occasionally someone claims to have found a miracle cure, but by the following month, everyone's scratching again and swearing revenge on the next passing rat. Lice and fleas are democratic in their affections, ignoring wealth, age or status. In a way, they're the ultimate medieval equalizer. Rich or poor, everyone shares in the misery. Communal scratching becomes background music at every gathering, church, feasts, funerals, and even the odd wedding. You'd think it would be embarrassing, but when everyone is doing it, the shame just fades into resignation. By spring, the return of warmer weather, and eventually a real bath, finally puts a dent in the lice population. There's a festival air to the first washing day, when the whole village lines up at the stream, scrubbing skin and hair until everyone glows, and the water runs away in terror. For a brief, shining moment, you're parasite-free, if only until next winter rolls around. So, if you ever find yourself in the medieval ice age, remember, it's not the wolves, the cold, or the lack of food that will break your spirit. It's the tiny, itchy armies crawling just beneath the surface, united in their quest to make sure nobody ever sleeps through the night. Communal suffering is the only real cure, and perhaps a little fire singeing now and then. So you made it, at least in spirit, through another medieval winter. You survived frozen floors, crunchy straw beds, turnip soup that haunts your dreams, and the kind of cold that invents new ways to sneak into your bones. You banked the fire, wore every piece of clothing you owned, and learned that the true secret to not freezing was simply never being alone, not even from lice. Every breath was a small act of rebellion against the ice age outside, and every morning you woke up with all your toes was a minor miracle. Take a moment as you drift off tonight to appreciate the stubborn resilience of the people who actually lived this way, not for one long night, but for years and generations. They patched holes in their homes and in their plans, outwitted the cold with teamwork and creative suffering, and found laughter even when the only thing in the pantry was a single withered parsnip. They endured, not because it was easy, but because the alternative was even worse. So tonight, as you tuck into your clean bed with hot water, central heating, and the soothing hum of your electric fan, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors, who survived lice, leeches, frostbite, and soup that might kill you. Because history may be uncomfortable, gross, and a little bit terrifying, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and, let's be honest, kind of ridiculous. Rest easy, you've earned it. The fire's still burning, the wind can't reach you here, and tomorrow there's no turnip soup waiting for breakfast. Good night.